Jamie Morgan had always been a patient man. 3 years in the peaceful suburb of Sycamore Heights had taught him to roll with the punches, the occasionally passive-aggressive notes about lawn height, the mandatory approval forms for any exterior changes, and the annual dues that somehow increased every year despite minimal improvements to the community. But even Jamie had his limits, and Brenda Holloway was about to discover exactly where they lay. It started on a blistering Tuesday in July. After 12 hours at the hospital where he worked as a nurse, Jamie returned home to find his garden hose stretched across his meticulously maintained lawn, disappearing over the fence into Brenda's yard. The unmistakable sound of splashing and children's laughter drifted over the white picket divider. "You've got to be kidding me," Jamie muttered, dropping his lunch bag onto his porch swing. He had never been particularly close with Brenda, the self-appointed neighborhood watchdog who, despite having no official position on the HOA board, behaved as though she personally wrote every bylaw. Their interactions had been limited to curt nods at community barbecues and the occasional dispute when Jamie's visiting friends parked incorrectly on the street outside his home. Jamie followed the hose around to Brenda's backyard gate, which was predictably unlocked. The scene that greeted him was exactly as he'd suspected. Brenda lounging in a deck chair beside an enormous inflatable pool filled nearly to the brim with water, his water, while her twin 8-year-olds splashed happily inside. "Excuse me," Jamie called over the fence, his voice tight with restraint. "Any particular reason you're using my water without asking?" Brenda lowered her oversized sunglasses, looking at Jamie as though he'd interrupted a royal ceremony. "Oh, Jamie, I knocked earlier, but you weren't home. The kids were desperate to cool off, and our outdoor spigot is broken. I figured you wouldn't mind helping out a neighbor." She smiled sweetly, but her eyes remained cold and calculating. "Actually, I do mind. Water isn't free, Brenda. That's probably $50 of water in that pool." Brenda waved a manicured hand dismissively. "Don't be dramatic. It's just water. Besides, you're single. It's not like you need to save money for a family." Jamie felt his blood pressure rising. This wasn't the first time Brenda had helped herself to his property. She borrowed his ladder last fall and returned it with a broken rung, taken plants from his garden for her own arrangements, and once even used his garbage bins for 3 weeks when hers were full. "I'd want you to pay for the water, and next time, ask before taking anything of mine," Jamie said firmly. Brenda's smile vanished. "The HOA encourages neighborly cooperation, Jamie. Perhaps you should review Section 5 of the Community Guidelines about maintaining harmonious relationships." "I don't think Section 5 covers theft," Jamie replied, reaching down to disconnect his hose from her pool. "Don't you dare," Brenda snapped, standing up. "The kids need another hour at least. They haven't finished playing." Jamie looked at the children who had stopped splashing and were watching the adults with wide eyes. He sighed and checked his watch. 1 hour. Then I'm coming back for my hose. And I expect compensation for the water bill." "Fine," Brenda replied icily, "though I think you're being ridiculous." As Jamie walked back to his house, he noticed other neighbors peering from windows and porches. Brenda wasn't just any neighbor, she was connected. By morning, she had half the community believing he was the villain for not freely offering his resources. He entered his house, mind racing. If Brenda thought she could walk all over him, she was sorely mistaken. Jamie wasn't confrontational by nature, but he believed in boundaries and consequences for those who crossed them. Inside his kitchen, Jamie's eyes fell on the cabinet where he kept his baking supplies. A slow smile spread across his face as an idea began to form. If Brenda wanted his water so badly, perhaps he should make it a bit more interesting. Jamie spent the evening researching. His laptop screen illuminated his living room as he scrolled through dozens of websites, taking notes on his phone. As a nurse, he knew exactly what he was looking for. Something harmless yet memorable, inconvenient but not dangerous. He wasn't out to hurt anyone, especially not Brenda's kids. He simply wanted to teach her a lesson about respecting other people's property. The next morning, Junie called in a favor and switched shifts with a coworker, ensuring he'd be home during the day. If his suspicions were correct, Brenda would wait until she thought he was at work before borrowing his water again. The weather forecast predicted another scorcher, perfect pool weather. At 8:30 a.m., Jamie made a show of loading his scrubs into his car, waving cheerfully to Mrs. Patel across the street and driving away. He circled the block twice before parking behind the community center, a short walk from his house, and doubling back through the walking trail that connected to his backyard. Inside his garage, Jamie assembled his supplies, a bottle of blue food coloring, concentrated garlic extract he used for cooking, and a funnel. From his nursing knowledge, he knew that food coloring was harmless to skin but would temporarily stain it, while garlic extract would create an unmistakable odor that lingered. Neither would cause any actual harm, just inconvenience. Jamie waited patiently, reading a medical journal on his tablet while occasionally peering through the blinds. At 11:42 a.m., his patience was rewarded. Brenda emerged from her house in a wide-brimmed hat and floral caftan, glancing furtively toward Jamie's empty driveway before making her way to his outdoor spigot. Right on schedule, Jamie whispered to himself, watching as Brenda connected her own hose to his water source and began filling what appeared to be an even larger inflatable pool than yesterday's. When Brenda disappeared back into her house, Jamie seized his opportunity. He slipped outside carrying a small backpack. He quickly located where Brenda had connected her hose to his spigot and implemented his plan. Using a Y splitter he purchased, he connected both Brenda's hose and his own. His hose led to a small container where he carefully added his special ingredients, the blue food coloring and garlic extract, before reconnecting everything so the mixture would feed directly into Brenda's supply line. The physics were simple. As the water flowed, it would gradually pull his concoction into the stream headed for Brenda's pool. The dilution would be substantial, enough to create a noticeable blue tint and a pungent garlic smell, but not enough to cause any harm or permanent damage. Task complete, Jamie retreated to his garage, leaving the setup running exactly as Brenda had arranged it. Through a small window, he had a perfect view of Brenda's backyard. Now all he had to do was wait. 30 minutes later, Brenda returned to her yard with her twins and what appeared to be several other neighborhood children in tow. Jamie recognized the Peterson kids from 2 doors down and the Wilson twins from across the street. Brenda had apparently organized an impromptu pool party using Jamie's water without his permission again. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show," Jamie murmured, settling in with a protein bar and bottle of water. He estimated it would take another 20 minutes for the effect to become noticeable. Sure enough, about 15 minutes later, one of the children pointed at the water and said something Jamie couldn't hear. Brenda approached the pool, her body language shifting from relaxed to concerned. She leaned over, dipping her hand into the water, which now had a distinctly blue tinge. Her confusion was evident even from Jamie's vantage point. The children, however, seemed delighted by the magical color change, splashing with increased enthusiasm. One of them jumped out and ran toward Brenda, hugging her legs with wet arms. When Brenda looked down at herself afterward, Jamie could almost hear her shriek of dismay at the blue handprints now decorating her pristine white caftan. As if on cue, Brenda's nose wrinkled. She leaned closer to the pool again, sniffing suspiciously. The unmistakable aroma of garlic was beginning to permeate the area. Jamie knew from experience that the smell would grow stronger as the water warmed in the sun. Brenda's head snapped up, her gaze darting directly toward Jamie's house. Though she couldn't see him hidden in his garage, her expression of dawning realization was priceless. She knew exactly who was responsible. Jamie watched as Brenda frantically began ushering the children out of the now blue, garlic-scented pool. Several of the kids were already showing signs of the food coloring's effects: blue-tinged hands, blue splashes on their bathing suits, and in one unfortunate case, a blue streak across a blonde head of hair. "You!" Brenda shrieked, storming toward Jamie's yard with such fury that her flip-flops slapped against the concrete like thunderclaps. "What did you put in my pool?" Jamie leaned casually against his fence. "Your pool? I believe you mean my water in your pool. The water you took without permission." Again. The children stood in Brenda's yard, dripping blue water onto the grass, their expressions vacillating between confusion and delight. Several were giggling and examining their now blue palms and fingertips. "Look, Mommy, I'm a Smurf," one of the Peterson kids called out, seemingly thrilled with this development. "You've ruined everything," Brenda hissed, her voice low enough that only Jamie could hear. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The Wilsons have a family portrait scheduled for tomorrow." Jamie shrugged. "Food coloring washes off in a few days. Maybe next time ask before taking things that don't belong to you." "Food coloring?" Brenda's face contorted with rage. "And what is that smell?" "It's like," she sniffed the air, her nose wrinkling in disgust. "Like garlic?" "Garlic extract," Jamie confirmed with a nod. "Completely harmless, but it does tend to linger. On skin, on hair." He paused meaningfully. "On designer caftans." Brenda looked down at her once pristine white garment now decorated with blue handprints and water splatters. Her face paled, then flushed crimson. "This is Dolce & Gabbana, you absolute monster." "And that was my water," Jamie countered calmly, "which I pay for." By now, parents had begun arriving, drawn by phone calls and texts from their confused children. Mrs. Wilson stood slack-jawed at the sight of her twins, their blonde hair now streaked with blue. Mr. Peterson was trying not to laugh as he examined his son's blue arms. Mrs. Patel from across the street had wandered over with her smartphone raised, not even trying to hide the fact that she was recording the entire scene. "He sabotaged my pool party," Brenda announced the gathering crowd, pointing an accusatory finger at Jamie. "He put chemicals in the water." Food coloring and garlic extract, Jamie corrected, addressing the concerned parents. I'm a nurse. It's completely harmless. The color will wash off in a few days and the smell will fade. I just wanted to teach Brenda a lesson about using my water without permission. She used your water without asking, Mr. Peterson asked, his amused expression shifting to something more serious. Twice now, Jamie confirmed, yesterday and again today. The crowd's sympathies visibly shifted. Everyone in Sycamore Heights knew about water bills in the summer months, especially during a heat wave. That's not right, Brenda, Mrs. Wilson said, shaking her head as she examined her children's blue-streaked hair. You should have asked. Or use your own water, Mrs. Patel added, still filming. Brenda looked around desperately, realizing she was rapidly losing her audience. He deliberately targeted children, she tried. No, Jamie corrected firmly. I targeted water thieves. The fact that children were involved is unfortunate, but that's on you, Brenda. You're the one who invited them to swim in stolen water. The phrase stolen water rippled through the small crowd. Several neighbors nodded in agreement. I'm calling the HOA board about this, Brenda threatened, her voice shaking. This is harassment. It's vandalism. Go ahead, Jamie replied. I'd love to explain to the board exactly why my water bill will be so high this month, and I'm sure they'd be interested in reviewing my security camera footage. This last part was a bluff. Jamie didn't actually have security cameras, but Brenda didn't know that. Brenda's eyes widened slightly. You recorded me. Every second, Jamie lied smoothly. From when you checked if my car was gone to when you connected your hose to my spigot without permission. Mr. Peterson chuckled. Sounds like you're the one who's going to have some explaining to do, Brenda. The crowd was now openly murmuring against Brenda, several people shaking their heads in disapproval. Mrs. Patel had stopped recording and was texting rapidly, no doubt spreading the news throughout the neighborhood gossip chain. Brenda looked around at the shifting alliances, her social standing crumbling before her eyes. With a final glare at Jamie, she turned on her heel. Everyone out of my yard. Now, the party's over. As parents collected their blue-tinted children, many shot sympathetic glances at Jamie. Mr. Peterson even gave him a subtle thumbs-up behind Brenda's back. Jamie returned to his house, satisfied that his point had been made. He disconnected his special apparatus from the water line and put away the evidence. The revenge had been swift, effective, and harmless, exactly as he'd planned. The Sycamore Heights Community Center hadn't seen this many residents in attendance since the contentious vote on whether to allow artificial grass 3 years ago. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows facing the long table where the 5 HOA board members sat, shuffling papers and whispering among themselves. President Walter Thompson, a retired attorney with a fondness for Robert's Rules of Order, sat center stage, flanked by Treasurer Diane Lewis, Secretary Frank Jenkins, and board members Gloria Chen, and to Jamie's dismay, Richard Holloway, Brenda's husband. Jamie sat in the third row, having arrived early on Mrs. Patel's advice. He'd spent the morning preparing a calm, factual statement about the water theft and his admittedly unconventional response. He'd also printed copies of his water bills from the past 3 months for comparison. The room filled quickly. Jamie noticed several parents from yesterday's pool incident, including Mr. Peterson, who gave him a subtle nod, and Mrs. Wilson, whose twins still sported faint blue streaks in their blonde hair. Mrs. Patel slid into the seat beside Jamie, her phone already poised for surreptitious recording. Brenda's been lobbying board members all night, Mrs. Patel whispered. Richard's definitely in her corner, and I think she's got Diane too. Jamie nodded grimly. Thanks for the heads up. At precisely 7:00 p.m., Thompson called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. This emergency session of the Sycamore Heights Homeowners Association is now in session. We're here to address a complaint filed by resident Brenda Holloway against resident James Morgan regarding an incident on July 17th involving alleged water tampering and, he adjusted his glasses, peering at the paper before him, malicious chemical warfare. A ripple of whispers spread through the audience. Due to the serious nature of these accusations, we'll hear from both parties before making any determinations. Mrs. Holloway, please present your case. Brenda strode to the podium, her expression solemn. She dressed for the occasion in a conservative navy pantsuit that Jamie recognized from her regular appearances at city council meetings. The blue handprints from yesterday were nowhere to be seen. Thank you, President Thompson, esteemed board members and neighbors. Brenda began, her voice trembling slightly. Yesterday, I experienced something no mother should ever have to endure. I watched helplessly as children, innocent children, were exposed to unknown substances that turned their skin blue and filled the air with noxious fumes. Jamie fought the urge to roll his eyes. Food coloring and garlic extract were hardly unknown substances. My neighbor James Morgan, Brenda continued, gesturing dramatically toward Jamie, admitted to deliberately contaminating water where he knew children would be playing. This was no harmless prank. This was a calculated act of aggression against our community's most vulnerable members. Brenda produced several printed photographs showing children with blue-tinted hands and faces. These children were traumatized. The Wilson twins have a family portrait today that now must be rescheduled. The Peterson boy developed a rash. That's not true. Mr. Peterson called out from the back. Bobby doesn't have any rash. Thompson rapped his gavel. Please hold all comments until the presentation is complete. Brenda cleared her throat. As I was saying, this behavior is dangerous, unstable, and has no place in our community. Mr. Morgan works in healthcare and should know better than to experiment on children without consent. I'm formally requesting that the board issue the maximum fine allowed by our bylaws and place a permanent note in Mr. Morgan's homeowner file. Additionally, I believe a restraining order may be necessary for the safety of the neighborhood children. She returned to her seat to scattered applause, primarily from her usual social circle seated in the front row. Thank you, Mrs. Holloway, Thompson said. Mr. Morgan, your response? Jamie approached the podium calmly, carrying his folder of documentation. He looked around the room, making eye contact with several neighbors before speaking. Thank you for the opportunity to address these creative accusations, Jamie began. The facts are simple. Mrs. Holloway used my outdoor water spigot without permission twice in 2 days, resulting in significant unauthorized water usage. He placed his water bills on the document camera, highlighting the typical summer usage. Based on pool capacity estimates, Mrs. Holloway's unauthorized water usage will likely add approximately $60 to my next bill. He paused to let that sink in. Several homeowners nodded in understanding. When confronted about the first incident, Mrs. Holloway dismissed my concerns and refused to compensate me. When she repeated this behavior the very next day, I decided The 15-minute recess stretched to 30 as muffled voices emanated from behind the closed door of the small office where the HOA board had retreated. Through the window, Jamie could see animated gestures and occasional head shaking, particularly from Richard Holloway, whose face had grown increasingly redder as the discussion progressed. In the main room, the atmosphere had transformed from a formal hearing into something resembling a support group for Brenda survivors. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other beyond polite hellos were now exchanging stories, comparing notes, and even laughing together over shared experiences with the neighborhood tyrant. She reported me for having my trash cans out 10 minutes past collection time, Mrs. Chen from Oak Lane was saying, while her own Christmas decorations stayed up until March. She borrowed my pressure washer last summer, Mr. Ramirez added. When I asked for it back, she said it broke and refused to replace it. Brenda remained isolated in the front row, her back rigid, pretending to be engrossed in her phone. Occasionally, she glanced toward the deliberation room, her expression growing more concerned as time passed. Finally, the door opened and the board members filed back in. Richard Holloway deliberately avoided looking in his wife's direction as he took his seat. President Thompson's expression was unreadable as he called the meeting back to order. After careful consideration of the testimony and evidence presented, Thompson began adjusting his glasses. The board has reached a decision. The room fell silent. Regarding the complaint filed by Mrs. Holloway against Mr. Morgan, we find the following. First, the unauthorized use of water from Mr. Morgan's property constitutes a violation of Covenant 7.3, which prohibits the use of another resident's utilities without express permission. Jamie felt a surge of vindication as several neighbors nodded in agreement. Second, while Mr. Morgan's method of addressing this violation was unorthodox, it did not violate any specific HOA covenant, nor did it pose any documented health or safety risk. The substances used were, as Mr. Morgan stated, commonly available food items. Thompson paused, looking directly at Brenda. Therefore, the board dismisses the complaint against Mr. Morgan and issues the following directives. Mrs. Holloway will compensate Mr. Morgan for the estimated water usage in the amount of $75 within 7 days. Additionally, Mrs. Holloway will receive a formal warning for unauthorized utility usage. A collective murmur of approval spread through the room. Brenda's face flushed crimson as she gripped the edge of her seat. Furthermore, Thompson continued, raising his voice slightly to maintain order. In light of the numerous additional concerns raised during this meeting, the board has determined that a comprehensive review of Mrs. Holloway's standing complaints against other homeowners is warranted. This announcement elicited surprised looks and a few scattered cheers. Secretary Jenkins will conduct this review over the next 30 days. Any homeowner with a pending violation notice initiated by Mrs. Holloway may request a suspension until this review is complete. Thompson turned his attention to Richard Holloway. Board member Holloway has recused himself from all matters pertaining to his wife's complaints and this review process. Richard stared fixedly at the table, refusing to meet Brenda's outraged glare. Finally, Thompson concluded the board wishes to remind all residents that neighborly cooperation is indeed encouraged, as stated in our community guidelines. However, cooperation begins with respect for boundaries and property. This meeting is adjourned. The bang of the gavel was almost drowned out by the immediate buzz of conversation that erupted. Several people approached Jamie to offer congratulations and expressions of support. Brenda stood abruptly, gathering her belongings with trembling hands. "This isn't over," she hissed as she passed Jamie on her way to the exit. "You mean a powerful enemy." Jamie watched her dramatic exit with a bemused expression. "I think I'll survive," he replied calmly. As the crowd dispersed, Mrs. Patel lingered behind with Jamie. "That was quite something," she said, tucking her phone away. "You know she's going to make your life miserable now." "Maybe," Jamie conceded. "Or maybe she'll finally learn that actions have consequences."